I told you to get out! Get out of my house right now! I don't want to see you here again!
I didn't hear the argument start, only the sound of boxes sliding across the hallway floor, like someone quietly erasing me from my own home. By the time I reached the doorway, my possessions were already sitting outside in the cold dawn air, and my son-in-law stood where I used to sleep. What none of us knew then was that one careless decision was about to unravel every truth we'd been pretending not to see. My dear listeners, thank you for being here. Please subscribe to the channel and tap that like button. It truly helps us to share more stories like this one. I always find it beautiful to see where you're listening from, so drop your city or country in the comments below, and let's see how far this story can travel across the world. I had moved into my daughter Lena's house after her health began slipping, gently, quietly, and with as little burden as a mother can offer. The place always smelled of cinnamon tea and warm wood, the sort of house where mornings felt soft and honest. But after her husband, Mark, lost his job and his temper more often than either of us could ignore, the walls seemed to hold their breath. I tried to stay small, to help, to keep peace. Until the morning he decided my presence, my bed, my belongings, my very place in the house, no longer mattered. I woke before the sun that morning, not because of a dream or the usual creak of the house settling, but because something heavy was being dragged across the floorboards. It was a slow sound, rough cardboard scraping wood, like the house itself was resisting. For a moment I lay still, listening. The rhythm was uneven, strained, almost apologetic. When I finally swung my legs over the side of the bed, the cold touched my feet in a way that felt different, as if the air knew something I didn't. I followed the sound, each step softer than the last, afraid of what I'd find. The hallway had always been a gentle place in the mornings. Sunlight usually slipped through the narrow window at the end, brushing the floor like warm fingers. But today, there was no sunlight, only dim gray like dawn choosing not to come. I remember noticing the smell first. Dust rising from cardboard, the faint musk of old sweaters, the ghost of lavender from the drawer liners I'd used years ago. It was the scent of a life being lifted piece by piece. And then I saw them, my blouses, my winter shawl, the framed photograph of Lena at 6 years old, the one she begged me to hang above my bed so she could watch over me. All of it sat neatly by the front door, stacked, contained, ready, as if I were a guest who'd overstayed. I didn't call out, didn't even breathe loud enough to stir the silence. I just stood there, one hand closing around the doorway, grounding myself against something I didn't yet want to name. The scrape came again, another box sliding forward, and that's when I finally saw him. Mark. Back turned, shoulders tense, moving with the sharp impatience of someone who wants a task done before questions can be asked, and behind him, Lena, my daughter, my heart. Her hands were clasped together like she was holding herself from breaking. Mark didn't hear me at first. He was too focused on the last box, nudging it into place with the heel of his hand. His voice came low and clipped, words not meant for me. "Mom can settle in once this is out of the way." Lena murmured something back, something small, but he didn't slow down. I stepped forward just enough that the floorboard beneath me groaned, not loudly, just a soft, aching sound. He turned, not startled, not guilty, just annoyed, as if my presence complicated a plan he thought would stay quiet. "Oh," he said, wiping his hands on his jeans, "you're up." I looked at the boxes again, looked at the sweater peeking out of the top, the one Lena knitted for my last birthday. Something inside my chest pulled tight. "What is this, Mark?" My voice sounded thinner than I intended, more fragile around the edges. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he glanced over his shoulder at Lena. A quick, sharp look that made her eyes drop to the floor. Then he said it, flat, matter of fact, like the weather. My mother will need your room now. There are words that cut clean. Then there are words that fray quietly, like fabric left in rain. His were the second kind, soft but unraveling everything they touched. I stood there, waiting for the explanation that didn't come, waiting for Lena to look at me, waiting for someone to say this wasn't cruelty, just misunderstanding. But Mark only folded his arms, already finished with the conversation he hadn't really started. And Lena held her breath. Her shoulders rose just slightly, trembling at the top, as if she were holding back two opposing truths and didn't know which one to let fall. I stepped closer, reaching out without thinking. Not to touch, just to close the distance between mother and daughter. But Mark shifted, just enough to place himself between us. Not aggressively, not visibly rude, just enough. A small, quiet barrier. I don't understand, I whispered. He sighed hard as if I were a child refusing simple instructions. She's older. She needs space. You'll be fine in the spare room. The spare room, the storage room, the place where old shoes and broken appliances lived. A part of me waited for Lena to step forward and say something, anything, even a whispered apology. But she stayed still, knuckles white, eyes fixed on the edge of the top box, the one holding my photo albums. And in that stillness, I felt something close inside me. Not anger, not yet, just the cold understanding of a door quietly shutting on the life I thought we shared. I walked toward the boxes because I didn't know what else to do. My fingers brushed the corner of one, dust clinging to my skin. It felt like touching a gravestone, familiar yet suddenly belonging to another world. Behind me, no one moved, no one spoke. Even the house seemed to hold its breath. Outside the window, dawn finally pushed through the clouds, pale and unsure, casting a thin line of light across the hallway floor. It stopped just before my feet as if deciding whether to come closer. I swallowed, tasting the bitterness of a truth I wasn't ready for. Something had changed in this home long before this morning, and I wondered, quietly, painfully, what darkness had been growing while I wasn't looking. Would I be ready when it finally stepped into the light? The doorbell rang just once, a short, confident note. The kind people use when they already know they'll be let in. By the time I reached the hallway, she was already stepping inside, brushing the cold from her coat like she owned the warmth gathering in the house. Mark's mother didn't pause to greet me. Her eyes moved past me, searching, choosing, claiming. And when she walked straight toward my old bedroom, the one I'd slept in just the night before, it felt like watching a stranger enter a memory I wasn't done holding. Her footsteps didn't hesitate. Mine did. The hallway smelled faintly of furniture polish and the cinnamon tea I'd made before sunrise. It used to be a comforting scent, a mix of morning and home. But now it settled oddly, as if it didn't recognize the air it drifted through. Mark's mother walked ahead of us, her heels tapping lightly, confidently, like she had rehearsed this path in her mind long before today. Her posture was straight, chin lifted in the way of someone who has never been denied space. I stayed back, close to the wall. It reminded me of something I once told Lena when she was little. If you stay very still, sometimes the world shows you what it really is. And that morning, the world was showing me more than I wanted to see. Mark followed behind his mother, carrying nothing, announcing nothing. He didn't need to. His silence had already carved the morning into two parts, before she arrived, and now. Lena stood near me, not beside, not behind, but somewhere in between, like someone trying to place herself on the right side of a fault line. When his mother pushed open the door to my old room, the hinges didn't creak. They just sighed. She stepped inside with the reverence of someone entering a space meant for her, not borrowed, not shared. Her fingertips brushed the doorframe first, almost ceremonially, then drifted along the wall as she walked deeper into the room. "This is lovely," she said, her voice warm but strangely hollow, like she was talking to herself more than anyone else. So light. So peaceful. She moved from corner to corner, touching the curtains I ironed last week, opening the drawers I once filled with folded sweaters, examining the nightstand, where I kept a book and a framed photo of Lena as a girl. The photo was gone now, moved, packed, erased. I stood in the hallway, hands clasped in front of me, watching the shape of my life reflected in her movements, each gesture rewriting what used to be mine. Lena stood behind Mark, her eyes flickering up to me for just a second. There was apology there, soft, fragile, quickly swallowed. "Your mother will love this," Mark's mother continued. "It has a gentle feel." She didn't mean me when she said "your mother." She meant herself. Mark didn't correct her. He just nodded, jaw tight, one hand gripping Lena's shoulder like a polite restraint. I don't know what made me speak. Maybe it was the way she opened the closet and looked inside like she expected to find space waiting for her. Maybe it was the way Mark's fingers pressed lightly, too lightly, into Lena's shoulder. Maybe it was simply the way the room looked with someone else breathing in it. "Did you need anything?" My voice sounded small, even to me, unsteady at the end. She turned then, just her head, just enough to acknowledge I existed. "Oh no, dear," she said, smiling with her lips but not her eyes. "I'm just settling in." Settling in, as if my life had been an unmade bed waiting for her hands. Behind her, Mark shifted slightly, as if preparing to step between us should I make this moment inconvenient. He didn't need to. I was too tired for anything but standing still. Lena stepped forward a little, drawn by something in the silence, guilt or worry or both. But Mark's grip tightened just a fraction. Not possessive, not cruel, just controlling enough to tell her, not now. And that was when something inside me shifted. Not like a crack, not loud, more like a quiet, steady cooling. A realization that warmth had been leaking from this house long before this morning. How long had they planned this? How many conversations happened behind half-closed doors? How many days had my room stopped being mine without me noticing? The answers hovered unspoken in the air, settling like dust on old memories. She kept wandering through the room, humming softly as she imagined her life unfolding where mine had been. I stayed in the hallway, watching the three of them framed in the soft gray light, the new arrangement of a family I once believed I still belonged to. Mark's mother closed the drawer gently, satisfied. Mark released his grip on Lena, but she didn't move, and I breathed in the quiet that gathered between us all, a quiet that felt less like peace and more like the space left after something breaks. I stepped back, just once, giving the moment room to settle, and I wondered, if a house can shift its heart, where does a mother go when hers no longer fits inside? The storage room wasn't meant for living in. You could tell by the way the single bulb flickered, like it was tired of trying to light. Such a forgotten space. My first night there, I lay on the narrow cot they'd pushed against the wall and listened to the hum of the refrigerator through the thin plaster. It pulsed steadily, like a heartbeat that didn't belong to the house anymore. By morning, the smell of dust had settled into my clothes, and when I stepped out with my cup of tea, warmed between both hands, I wondered how long it would take before I stopped feeling like someone visiting her own life. The kitchen had always been my favorite room, a small place with soft yellow tiles and cabinets that creaked like old friends greeting you. But that morning, the room felt rearranged, not physically, no, just spiritually. As if all the warmth had been nudged an inch to the left, putting me just outside of it. Mark's mother was already at the table. She had unpacked a row of vitamin bottles, a purse, a stack of folded newspapers, and a jar of marmalade she must have brought from home. Each item claimed the space with the quiet entitlement of someone who believes nothing needs permission. The sunlight through the window hit her silver hair just right, turning it into something almost sharp. She didn't look up when I entered, didn't pause her chatter. A steady stream of stories about people I didn't know, spoken as if the air required filling. I sat down at the far corner, the tea warming my palms. The steam curled gently between us, the only thing that seemed unsure of where to rise. Lena slipped into the kitchen a moment later, her shoulders drawn up, her steps too light, like she was afraid to wake something that might be sleeping in the quiet. She caught my eye briefly, offering a small, apologetic smile that dissolved the instant Mark walked in behind her. I had just lifted my cup to take the first sip when it happened. A small motion, barely a gesture. Mark's mother reached across the table, 2 fingers resting lightly on the rim of my cup, and slid it several inches to the side. Not harshly, not rudely. Just enough to make room for the rest of her belongings, as if the table and the moment belonged to her alone. "Oh, let me just put this here," she said brightly, not looking at me, not seeing me. My cup now sat at the edge, steam drifting upward into nothing. Lena stood perfectly still beside the counter, the kind of stillness that comes from a choice. Hold your breath or let something break. She chose the first. Mark busied himself with the kettle, though it didn't need boiling. He moved with the exaggerated calm of someone pretending not to notice tension, but noticing every inch of it. When he glanced at me, it was quick and assessing, the way a landlord might look at a wall he planned to repaint. That glance told me everything. To him, the problem had been addressed, relocated, contained in a storage room near the kitchen. The quiet between us was thick, thicker than steam, thicker than shame. I didn't say anything. Silence felt safer than truth, but sometimes silence has a gravity of its own, pulling people into the things they're trying to avoid. Mark's mother continued talking, unaware or unwilling to notice how her words skimmed over my presence, like I wasn't seated an arm's length away. "And I told her, you simply cannot let people walk all over you," she said, laughing softly. My fingers tightened around the cup. Lena's hands trembled slightly as she reached for a spoon. It slipped from her grasp and clattered onto the floor. A small accident, but in the quiet kitchen it sounded like a cry for help. Mark looked at her sharply, too sharply, the kind of look that makes a person shrink without moving. He placed a hand on her back, not in comfort but in caution, as if he were reminding her of something she was supposed to remember or stay silent about. And that's when I saw it. The flicker beneath his confidence, a fast, nervous shift in his jaw, a tightening around his eyes. Fear, not of me, not of his mother. Fear of something else, something unspoken, something he was carrying like a stone he couldn't put down. He spoke too casually when he said, "Let's not make a fuss over drop things." No one had said a word. The secret he carried pressed into the room like humidity, thick and invisible, but impossible to ignore. I sipped my tea slowly. Dust and detergent lingered on my clothes, but something else lingered in the air, a warning I didn't yet understand. When breakfast ended, Mark's mother gathered her things without a hint of awareness that she had rearranged more than just objects on a table. She hummed softly as she walked away, a tune full of confidence, not kindness. Lena stayed where she was, staring at the empty chair across from me. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The sunlight shifted, catching the edge of my cup, the spot where her hand had moved it aside, a small gesture, but weighty. I lifted the cup and walked back toward the storage room, the hallway dim and narrow, the air cooler than before. And as I closed the door behind me, I felt it again. That quiet certainty that something in this house had begun to unravel long before I ever noticed. Something Mark feared would soon come undone. Something I would have to face, whether I was ready or not. The house was unusually still that afternoon, the kind of stillness that feels deliberate, like someone pressed pause on all the usual sounds. Even the clock above the mantel ticked softer, as though it didn't want to interrupt whatever was settling in the air. I moved slowly through the living room with a damp cloth in hand, dust rising in thin, ghost-like threads from the shelves. And that's when I heard it. A faint vibration. A soft, rhythmic buzz coming from the armchair near the window. Mark's phone, face up, lit bright in the quiet like a secret wanting to be found. The living room had always been the warmest part of the house. The afternoon sun poured through the lace curtains, scattering small patterns of light across the floor. It gave the space a soft, hazy glow, muted, gentle, almost peaceful. But lately, even the sun couldn't soften the tension that lived in the walls. I moved toward the armchair, wiping dust from the picture frames along the way. My old photo, the one with Lena in pigtails, laughing so hard her eyes squeezed shut, sat slightly tilted. I reached out and straightened it, taking a breath that felt heavier than it should. The phone buzzed again, a quick pulse, persistent. I told myself not to look. I told myself to keep moving. But the glow of the screen pulled my eyes in the way a whispered name does. Gentle at first, then impossible to ignore. It was probably something simple, I thought. A bill reminder, a message from a coworker, nothing important. Yet something in my chest tightened, the way it does when you sense a storm before you see the clouds. I stepped closer, cloth still in hand, and let my eyes fall on the screen. A name I didn't recognize appeared at the top. Just one word, unfamiliar and oddly intimate. Below it, a string of messages. Short, late, unmistakably personal. I only saw the first few words before I realized what I was doing, before I realized how dangerous it felt to be looking at all. My breath caught in my throat, not from shock, but from the deep, instinctive understanding that this was not meant for me. Or for Lena. I pulled my gaze away, set the phone down as if it were left warm from someone else's hand. The screen dimmed, swallowing the evidence into a blank, quiet black. My heart thudded in my ears. I lifted the cloth and began wiping the bookshelf again, pretending I hadn't seen anything. Pretending I didn't feel that sudden burn of dread settle in my chest. Footsteps sounded in the hallway, sharp, closing in. I straightened a vase, moved a book slightly to the left, fussed with the edge of a picture frame I'd already aligned. The footsteps entered the room. I forced my breathing to stay even. When I turned around, Mark stood in the doorway, too still, too alert. His eyes flicked immediately to the armchair, to the spot where the phone lay, screen dark but not forgotten. He crossed the room faster than I expected, scooping the phone into his hand with a tightness that betrayed him. He tried to smooth his expression, but fear leaves its own fingerprints. "Did you see anything?" The question came out too quickly, too sharp, like a reflex instead of curiosity. My fingers tightened around the dust cloth. "I was just cleaning," I said softly. Neutral words, carefully placed, but even I could hear the tremble beneath them. He searched my face, not for truth, but for damage. For how much I might have seen, for how much he might already have lost. "That's my work stuff," he said, voice brittle at the edges. Private. Private. As if the whole house didn't breathe around his choices, as if his secrets didn't seep into the walls and settle into the air we all shared. His hand shook slightly as he slipped the phone into his pocket. Just a tremor, barely there. But it was enough. Fear lived in him. Not anger, not guilt. Fear. And fear only appears when someone has something to lose. I watched him struggle to steady himself, watched him force a breath, watched him pull a smile that never touched his eyes. "You didn't read anything?" I shook my head slowly, but inside, the glimpse of those messages lingered like the aftertaste of something bitter. He nodded stiffly and walked out, his footsteps too loud for a man trying to appear calm. The living room returned to its earlier quiet, but it felt different now, the way a room does after someone opens a window and lets in cold air. I stood there a long moment. the dust cloth hanging limp in my hand. The sun shifted, its patterns moving across the floor, soft but indifferent. The phone buzzed once more from the hallway, muffled, insistent, and my heart tightened again. Whatever Mark was hiding, whatever fear lived behind his eyes, it was no small thing. And for the first time, I wondered if the boxes in the hallway, the storage room, the moved cup, the quiet tension, had all been pieces of something much larger waiting to surface. The knock came just after dusk, when the house had settled into its evening hush and the last thread of daylight clung to the kitchen tiles. It wasn't a firm knock, nothing demanding or impatient. It was soft, careful, as if the person on the other side wasn't sure they were welcome. I sat up on the narrow cot, the thin blanket slipping from my lap, and listened to the quiet space between each tap on the door. 3 soft knocks, a pause, then one more, lighter than the rest. When I opened the door, she stood there, Mark's mother, holding a bowl of soup that steamed gently in the dim hallway light, like she wasn't sure whether she should offer it or apologize for bringing it. The storage room had grown colder in the evenings. The single bulb overhead flickered every so often, humming faintly as if fighting against its own exhaustion. I had set the crate I used as a nightstand beside the cot, a book resting on top, though I hadn't read more than a page in days. She stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, but not with the confidence she had carried the day she took my room. Tonight she moved as though each step required permission from the floor. "I brought you this," she said, setting the bowl gently on the crate. The smell of warm vegetables drifted up, comforting, familiar. And for a moment, I didn't know how to respond. She sat down on the edge of an empty crate across from me, her hands clasped loosely in her lap. I noticed how her fingers trembled slightly, tapping a quiet rhythm against her knuckles. The hallway behind her remained dim, giving the room an almost cocooned feeling. Small, enclosed, safe only in the way darkness can sometimes feel like a blanket. She cleared her throat softly, and that's when I realized she hadn't come to talk about soup. "I want you to know," she began, staring at the floor instead of me, "I never meant to take your room." Her voice held something fragile, a thin thread stretched too tight. I watched her hands as she spoke. They flexed, then stilled, flexed again. "I didn't come here to make space for myself," she continued. "I came because Mark insisted. He told me he needed me here." The word "needed" hung in the air like a question neither of us wanted to open. I shifted slightly on the cot, the thin mattress crinkling beneath me. She finally looked up. Her eyes, usually sharp, almost proud, were softer now, dimmed, like someone trying to speak around a storm. "He said I should stay close, that he was dealing with something he couldn't handle alone." Her breath quivered, just once, barely noticeable unless you were already watching her fall apart in slow motion. I waited, gave her space to continue. Silence can be a way of reaching out, too. But instead of explaining, she pressed her lips together and shook her head. A small gesture, filled with resignation, as if she'd stepped too close to a truth she wasn't allowed to name. She leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice even though we were alone. "You should be careful," she whispered. The words were soft, but they hit the room with weight, thickening the air around us. "Careful of what?" I asked gently. She looked toward the door as if expecting someone to appear there. Her shoulders tightened. A shadow crossed her expression. Fear or guilt or both. "He's under pressure," she said finally. A vague answer. A safe answer. One that said everything and nothing at all. "Pressure from who?" I pressed, but my voice remained calm, almost warm. Not a challenge, an invitation. But she flinched like I'd struck something raw. "I shouldn't say more," she murmured. "It isn't my place." Her hands twisted together again, nerves betraying the composure she tried to maintain. "Then why warn me?" I asked quietly. She looked at me for a long moment, and in that moment, I saw the truth she couldn't speak. She wasn't warning me because of loyalty to Mark. She was warning me because something about this situation frightened her, too. "He's been different," she said finally. "Secretive, angry, not himself." She took a shaky breath. "And whatever he's hiding, it's not something he wants you near." The room felt smaller suddenly. The bulb flickered again, casting her face in brief, uneven shadows. She stood abruptly, smoothing her skirt with trembling hands as if she'd said too much already. She left as quietly as she had arrived, the bowl of soup still warm beside me, untouched. The hallway swallowed her footsteps quickly, leaving only the hum of the refrigerator and the faint trembling of the light above me. I lay back on the cot, staring at the uneven ceiling, her words echoing softly in the space between my breaths. "Be careful." The phrase replayed in my mind, each repetition growing heavier, pulling threads of suspicion through everything I'd seen that week. The phone, the tension, the glances, the silence. Mark wasn't just hiding something. He was worried it would slip. And as I closed my eyes, the house felt different again. Less like a home and more like a place, holding its breath, waiting for someone to finally uncover what had been simmering beneath its walls. At night, the house changed its voice. It whispered more, groaned more, held its breath in ways it never used to. Sometimes the sounds came soft and low, like two people trying to argue without waking a sleeping child. Other times, the voices slipped through the vents in sharp, broken pieces. Quick words, bitten off, swallowed again. I lay on my narrow cot, staring at the shadows on the ceiling, and listened as a door closed too gently to be innocent. Then another, and somewhere down the hall, a sob. Lena's. Small enough to hide, loud enough to break me. The days were quieter, almost eerily so, as if the house spent the daylight hours recovering from the nights. But the tension lingered beneath everything, in the way the kitchen chairs sat unevenly, in the way the hallway light flickered, in the way Lena's eyes never rested long on anything. Every evening, as the sun dipped past the window, I felt the air thicken, like the house was bracing itself. Mark moved through the rooms with a heaviness that didn't match his steps. His shoulders hunched as though carrying something invisible, yet his footsteps came fast, almost impatient, sharp taps across the floorboards that made the whole hallway flinch. His mother watched him from a distance now. Gone was the confidence she'd worn like a tailored coat. Instead, she hovered near doorways, fidgeting with her sleeves, eyes darting like she expected something to snap. I tried more than once to reach Lena. Once I found her standing in the kitchen, gripping a mug so tightly her knuckles turned white. Her eyes were red, but she smiled before I could speak. A small, strained curve that dissolved the moment Mark's footsteps echoed from the hallway. She set the mug down and slipped past me, silent, quick, folding herself into the privacy of her room before I could even lift a hand to stop her. The distance wasn't her choice. It was her shield. And that was when I knew something in this house wasn't just broken. It was festering. The arguments never lasted long. 2 minutes here, 5 minutes there, always hushed, always cut short. But the aftermath lingered. I'd sit up in bed after the last whisper faded, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the faint rustle of the trees outside, listening for Lena, listening for anything that might tell me she was all right. One night, I stepped into the hallway, the cold wood under my feet grounding me. The air smelled faintly of someone's cologne and something burnt. Tension always burned something. A door clicked open, then shut. Soft, deliberate. I pressed my hand gently against Lena's door. "Sweetheart," I whispered. No answer. Only the faintest sound of her breath catching on something. Maybe a sob she didn't want me to hear. Maybe a truth she didn't know how to speak. I stood there a long moment, forehead resting lightly against the wood, wishing I could reach through it, hold her, take her away from whatever storm she was trapped inside. But the house felt like it was holding her in place. Behind me, footsteps approached, heavy, dragging. Mark appeared at the end of the hall, rubbing his eyes with the back of his hand. "Everything okay?" I asked quietly. He didn't look at me, didn't even slow. "Just tired," he muttered. But tired men don't clench their fists. Tired men don't flinch at their own shadows. This wasn't exhaustion. It was pressure, the kind that cracks something inside a person. Over the next few days, the house stayed wound tight. Every door closing too softly, every conversation ending too quickly. Mark grew sharper, moving through rooms like a man trying not to disturb a sleeping monster, unless the monster was him. He snapped at small things, a misplaced towel, a drawer left open, a spoon in the sink. Then he would retreat into himself, pacing in short, jagged lines. His mother watched him from behind corners now, always pretending she wasn't. She'd straighten a picture frame that didn't need straightening, wipe down a clean surface, anything to keep her hands occupied. Something had changed in her. The nervousness wasn't subtle anymore. One afternoon, she stood in the living room doorway as Mark rifled through a drawer, muttering to himself. "Did you check the car?" she asked softly. He froze, just for a second, then shook his head too quickly. "No, stop asking." His mother flinched at the tone. I stood behind her, unseen by him. The tension in his shoulders told me enough. Whatever secret he carried wasn't small, and whatever he was hiding might already be beginning to seep into the walls. He slammed the drawer shut and brushed past us, the wind of his movement carrying the sharp scent of fear. Not anger, fear. I felt it like a cold thread weaving through the house. Something was slipping, and Mark knew it. That night, the arguing began again, muffled, desperate, like two people trying to avoid being overheard by the truth itself. A door closed softly, then another, and then silence. But it wasn't peaceful. It was the silence that settles after something breaks just out of sight. I lay awake, staring at the faint glow from the hallway, listening for Lena's breath, listening for anything that told me she hadn't shattered under the weight of whatever Mark was carrying. The house felt like it was holding its breath with me, and somewhere deep in its walls, something unspoken was stirring. A secret that had been pushed too far, too long, finally pressing toward the surface. Something was going to spill, and none of us were ready for what would follow. The sun had already slipped behind the houses when Lena came to me, the last of its light fading into a thin gray ribbon along the hallway floor. She didn't knock. She just opened the door and stepped inside, closing it quietly behind her like she was afraid the sound might break something fragile, hanging in the air. She sat beside me on the narrow cot without a word, her breath uneven, her eyes swollen from tears she hadn't planned to shed. In her hands was an envelope, sealed, stiff and trembling ever so slightly. She held it the way someone holds a truth they don't want to see but can no longer ignore. The room felt smaller that evening. The weak bulb above us cast a pale circle of light that didn't reach the corners, leaving them dipped in shadow. The hum of the refrigerator seeped through the wall again, steady and low, like a heartbeat trying to fill the silence between us. Lena didn't speak at first. She just stared at the envelope, thumbs rubbing over the sealed edge, back and forth, as if trying to smooth away the fear gathering inside her. Her hair was pulled back in a messy knot, strands falling around her face in a way that made her look younger and more breakable. I reached out, placing a gentle hand on hers, but she didn't look up. When she finally spoke, her voice came cracked, thin. It came today. The envelope felt heavier now that it had a name, a presence. She held it out to me, and I hesitated, not because I didn't want to see what was inside, but because I already felt the weight of what it might reveal. She tore it open before I could take it from her, unfolding the papers with shaking fingers. The sound of the paper rustling filled the room like a held breath being let go too suddenly. The numbers hit her first. Long lines, bold totals, dates that seemed too close together. I watched her eyes move across the page, each line draining a little more color from her face. "It's all gone," she whispered. She traced a finger down the statement. "Here, here, and here." Her voice grew smaller with each word. "These withdrawals, I didn't make them. I didn't authorize anything." Her hands trembled harder now, the paper shaking like it was cold. I took the page gently from her and scanned the lines. Large amounts, one after another, all in Mark's handwriting where the signatures appeared. I felt a knot forming in my stomach, slow and tightening. Lena wiped her cheek with the back of her hand and whispered, I asked him right in the kitchen." Her breath hitched. He didn't even deny it. She looked down at her lap, shoulders curling inward. "He just said I wouldn't understand." A pause. Her throat tightened. And then he walked away. The words didn't come out angry. They came out like a confession, like she'd failed in a way she couldn't quite name. I reached out, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear, but she stared straight ahead, at nothing, as if she were trying to piece her life back together in the air before her. The quiet stretched for a long moment. Then she whispered the sentence that hollowed the room. "I don't recognize my own husband anymore." Her shoulders shook once, twice. Then she pressed both hands to her face, trying to hold herself together. The sound that escaped her wasn't a sob. It was softer, smaller. The sound of something collapsing inward. I wrapped my arm around her, pulling her close until her forehead rested against my shoulder. Her breath came shakily, warming the fabric of my shirt. She kept murmuring it, over and over, like a prayer she didn't believe in anymore. "He's not the man I married. He's not the man I knew. I don't recognize him." Each repetition chipped something away. Hope, trust, certainty. Maybe all of them at once. I stroked her back gently, knowing comfort couldn't fix this, but still offering what little I had. When she finally lifted her head, her eyes held something I hadn't seen before. Not just fear, but realization. The kind that arrives slowly, like fog crawling over a field at dawn. "I think he's hiding something," she said softly. "He's always somewhere else, always distracted, angry, or scared. I can't tell which." Her fingers tightened around the envelope, crumpling its edges. "I think he's been hiding it for a long time." The room felt like it shrank again, pressing the truth into the air between us. She looked at me. The question in her eyes was quiet, trembling, desperate. What do I do now? I didn't give her an answer, not because I didn't have one, but because I knew she wasn't ready for the truth that would follow. Instead, I held her hand, feeling the pulse of her fear thudding quietly beneath her skin. The refrigerator hummed. The hallway light flickered. Somewhere in the house, a floorboard creaked. Almost knowingly, Lena tucked the envelope back into its seal, smoothing the wrinkles as though trying to restore something that had already torn. She stood to leave, pausing at the door, her silhouette trembling against the dim light. "I'm scared, Mom," she whispered. I nodded. "Then it's time to stop looking away." She stepped into the hallway's shadow, leaving me alone with the lingering weight of her fear. Whatever Mark was hiding, we were no longer on the outside of it. The front door slammed just after midnight, hard enough to rattle the frame of my small storage room. The echo rolled down the hallway like distant thunder, then faded into the kind of silence that doesn't belong in a home. I sat up slowly, listening. Mark's footsteps stormed down the driveway, gravel crunching under shoes that were carrying more than just anger. Then the engine started, a harsh, hurried sound, and the car tore off into the night. For a moment, the house held its breath, and that's when I heard it. A soft, trembling knock at my door. Not the careful knock she used before. This one sounded frightened. When I opened the door, Mark's mother stood there, pale and rattled, holding a small black duffel bag against her chest like she was trying to keep its contents from leaking out. Her eyes darted down the hallway, checking the shadows, listening for footsteps she knew wouldn't return any time soon. Then she stepped inside and closed the door, not with her usual confidence, but with hands that trembled enough to make the latch click twice. The weak bulb above flickered again, bathing her face in a sickly yellow light. It accentuated the worry carved deep into her features, lines I hadn't noticed before. She didn't sit right away. She pressed her back to the wall, clutching the bag tighter, as though it might steady her breathing. "I found it," she whispered, her voice barely more than air. "In Lena's closet." The sentence hung there between us, strange and heavy. I motioned for her to sit, but she hesitated, as if sitting meant admitting something was real. Finally, she lowered herself onto an overturned crate, the duffel bag landing in her lap with a soft thud that felt impossibly loud in the stillness. Her eyes met mine then, and for the first time since I'd known her, she looked genuinely afraid. She unzipped the bag slowly, her fingers shaking so hard the metal teeth clinked with every inch. "I didn't go looking," she said, voice thin. "I was helping Lena put away laundry. She was in the shower, and the closet door wouldn't close." She swallowed hard, blinking quickly, and then I saw it. The zipper opened fully, revealing what she'd been hiding. Clothes still wrapped in plastic, shoes with security tags folded neatly beside them, a designer wallet, the kind I'd only seen in magazines, a stack of crisp receipts, corners sharp, dates recent, and lying at the bottom, a second phone, not broken, not old, just secret. She lifted it gingerly with 2 fingers as if it might burn her. "I don't know who he is anymore," she whispered, her voice cracking on the last word. I looked at the items spread across my lap, each one too expensive, too polished, too deliberate. "These aren't ours," she said, shaking her head. "They're not from this house. They're not from this life." I felt a coldness settle under my skin, slow and creeping. The receipts fluttered slightly in the draft from the hallway. Every number printed on them was wrong for a family that had been rationing groceries. I reached for the second phone, but she flinched. "Careful," she breathed, as if touching it might pull something out into the open. She finally let go of the phone, hands falling into her lap like she'd run out of ways to hold herself together. "He said he needed me," she murmured, staring at the bag again. "He said he was in trouble, but not to worry." A humorless laugh slipped past her lips, brittle, sharp. Not to worry. Her shoulders shook once, barely noticeable. He promised he had things under control, but this... She gestured weakly at the collection of stolen-looking things. "This isn't control." I swallowed, my throat suddenly tight. "You think he's..." "What?" I asked quietly. She met my eyes then. Really met them. And there was something raw, almost desperate in her gaze. "I think he's hiding things from all of us," she whispered. "From Lena, from me, from you." She took a shaky breath. "And I think whatever he's tangled up in, it's not small, not harmless." Her hands twisted again, searching for something to hold. "He keeps leaving at night," she continued, "always angry, always afraid. He won't tell me anything. He won't tell her anything." Her voice dropped further. "And this..." She touched the bag lightly. "This feels like the edge of something worse." The bulb flickered overhead, casting shadows that crawled slowly up the wall. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The room felt too still, too quiet, like the house was listening. And in that stillness, dread settled like dust, soft, silent, impossible to ignore. She closed the bag with trembling fingers, as if sealing the truth back inside might keep the danger from seeping into the walls. "What should we do?" she whispered. I didn't answer, because there wasn't a simple answer anymore. The house creaked softly, a long, low sound like wood exhaling, as if even the beams and floorboards knew something had shifted. She stood slowly, pressing the duffel bag to her chest again, afraid to leave it behind and afraid to keep it. "I'm scared of what he's become," she said. And quietly, in the dim, flickering light, I realized I was too. Because secrets that live in the dark don't stay hidden forever. They spill. And when Mark's did, I knew the whole house would feel it. The storm didn't begin with thunder. It began with Lena's footsteps, soft, uneven, as she carried the duffel bag down the hallway like it was full of broken glass. And it began with the way the house held itself still, like even the walls were bracing for impact. I stood in the living room doorway as she placed the bag on the coffee table, her fingers lingering over the zipper as if touching it one last time before the truth spilled out. Mark entered a moment later, shoulders tense, jaw locked. His eyes landed on the bag, and just like that, the storm found its voice. The living room had that late evening stillness. Lamps lit low, curtains pulled tight, shadows stretching thin across the carpet. It was the kind of quiet that normally invited peace, but tonight it felt like a held breath. Mark froze in the doorway when he saw the bag. A flicker, barely a second, crossed his face. Fear, recognition. Something sharp and ugly. Lena stood straighter when he entered, though I could see her knees trembling beneath her jeans. Her hair was still damp from the shower, the strands clinging to her neck, making her look younger than she felt. I stayed near the side of the room, not interfering, not intruding, just present. Her mother. Her anchor if she needed one. Mark's mother hovered near the stairs, wringing her hands, watching her son with a dread she didn't bother hiding anymore. "Mark," Lena said quietly, "we need to talk about this." Her voice trembled at the edges, but there was something steady beneath it. Resolve, finally finding its shape. The bag sat between them, silent, dense, like a wound waiting to reopen. Mark stepped forward slowly, eyes darting from Lena to the bag, then to his mother, who seemed to shrink under his gaze. "What is this?" he asked, though he already knew. The lie was in the question itself. Lena unzipped the bag. One movement, one breath. The truth laid out in a quiet, devastating display. The clothes still in plastic, the designer wallet, the receipts, and the second phone. Mark's face paled before the anger rushed in behind it. "You went through my things?" he snapped. "It was in my closet," Lena replied, voice steadier this time. "I didn't put it there." He grabbed one of the receipts, crumpling it in his fist. "These were for resale," he said quickly. "You wouldn't understand. It's business." But each word frayed as he spoke it, threads of a lie coming undone. Lena shook her head. "Mark, we can't afford groceries some weeks, and you're buying this?" He inhaled sharply, chest rising in a way that reminded me of a man drowning. "It's temporary," he muttered. "It's under control." His mother stepped forward. "Mark, just tell her the truth, please." He whirled on her so fast she took a step back. "Mom, stay out of this." But her eyes softened, filling with tears. "I can't keep pretending either," she whispered. And then everything snapped. Mark's face twisted, not with anger but with desperation. A cornered look, a man standing at the edge of something he couldn't step back from. "You don't know what you're talking about," he growled. Lena took a shaky breath. "Then tell us. Tell me what's going on." "I don't owe you an explanation," he shouted, voice cracking in the middle. His mother reached out for his arm, gentle, pleading. "Mark, please." He shoved her hand away, not violently, but hard enough to knock her off balance, sending her into the side table. The lamp tipped, crashing to the floor, the bulb bursting with a soft pop of dying light. Mark froze. All of us did. For a heartbeat, the only sound was the lamp shade rolling in slow circles on the carpet. He stared at his mother, horrified, confused, then at Lena, whose tears had started but whose voice stayed calm. "Look at yourself," she whispered. "Just look." He backed away, shaking his head, muttering something that didn't form real words. Then he grabbed his jacket and stormed out the front door, slamming it so hard the frames on the wall trembled. Silence followed. A deep, hollow silence that settled into the room like smoke. Lena collapsed into my arms before the last echo of the door finished fading. Her body shook with quiet sobs. Not loud, not dramatic, just the kind of trembling grief that comes when fear and truth finally meet. "I can't do this anymore," she whispered into my shoulder. "I can't pretend he's still the man I married." I held her tighter, feeling her fingers clutch the fabric of my shirt as though anchoring herself to reality. Mark's mother slowly lowered herself into a chair, covering her mouth with trembling hands, eyes shining with a sorrow only a mother understands. The broken lamp lay between us, its shattered bulb catching the last bit of hall light. The truth was out now, unavoidable. And as we sat in that dim, shaken room, one question pulsed in my mind. If this was the beginning, what would the fallout look like when everything finally unraveled? The sun hadn't fully risen when I heard the front door open. Not with force this time, but with the sound of someone too tired to lift a latch properly. A slow creak, a hesitant click. I stepped into the hallway and saw Mark standing there, shoulders slumped, hair uncombed, shadows under his eyes so deep they looked like bruises. He didn't look like a man returning home. He looked like someone trying to gather enough courage just to walk past his own reflection. He glanced at me, only once, before looking away again, as if even eye contact felt too heavy to hold. That was the morning everything finally cracked. The kitchen felt colder than usual, as if the night air had crept in and settled into the tiles. I set my mug down gently, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator and the quiet ticking of the clock on the wall. Lena sat across from me, hands wrapped around a glass of water she hadn't touched. Her mother lingered by the stove, her fingers tapping nervously against the counter. Then Mark stepped into the room. He moved slowly, like each step asked a question he didn't have an answer to. He sank into the chair at the head of the table. The same chair where he once laughed, planned, pretended to steer this family with confidence he no longer remembered. No one spoke at first, only the creak of the chair as he leaned forward, elbows on the table, hands covering his face. When he finally breathed out, it wasn't anger anymore. It was defeat, quiet, unguarded, and strangely human. "I need to tell you something," he whispered. His voice struggled to fill the space between us. Lena's fingers tightened around her glass. His mother closed her eyes for a heartbeat. I waited gently, knowing the truth was ready to step out of whatever corner he had buried it in. "I lost my job," he said. The words landed softly, but they sounded like something breaking. The dull crack of a branch snapping under slow, steady pressure. "Months ago," he added, staring at the table. 6, maybe 8. Lena's breath hitched. She didn't look shocked, just tired, as if she'd been grieving this possibility long before the words were spoken aloud. His mother pressed a hand to her chest, whispering his name under her breath. I felt the room shift, not dramatically, just a subtle tilt, like the house itself had been bracing for this admission. Mark kept talking, words tumbling out now in uneven pieces. "They said it was misconduct, a humorless chuff of breath. I guess that's their word for it." He rubbed his forehead with a shaking hand. "I thought I'd fix it. Thought if I just made enough, quickly enough, I could put it all back before any of you knew." Lena's lips parted, trembling. "How? By buying stolen goods? Secret phones? Running out at night like we wouldn't notice?" He flinched. Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Mark swallowed hard and finally lifted his eyes. He looked at me. "I wouldn't have done any of it if there wasn't so much pressure," he said. A fragile accusation slipped into the space between us. You moving in, changing things in the house. It all added up. For a moment, I didn't breathe. It happened slowly, the air tightening, the clock ticking just a little louder, his mother straightening up with a steadiness I had not seen in her before. "Don't," she whispered. Mark blinked. "What?" "Don't blame her." Her voice wasn't loud, but it had an edge, the unmistakable sharpness of a mother who had spent years swallowing truths she no longer intended to hold down. "You pushed her out of her own room," she said, stepping forward one small, trembling step at a time. "You moved me into that room as if she were furniture you could rearrange." Her voice shook, but her words did not. "And now you want to blame her for your choices, your lies, your mistakes?" Mark's jaw tightened. "I'm not blaming." "You are," she cut in, "and I won't let you." He froze, staring at her with wide, startled eyes, a child caught in the doorway of his own wrongdoing. Lena finally spoke, her voice thin but steady. "I don't even recognize you anymore, Mark." He turned to her, desperation flickering in his expression. "I was trying to fix it, all of it." But even he heard how empty that sounded, how thin the reasoning was, how little truth rested beneath the words. The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, Lena asked, "Fix what? The job? The marriage? Yourself?" Mark looked down, and in that moment he seemed smaller than I'd ever seen him. He didn't get up. He didn't argue. He didn't reach for Lena or storm out again. He simply sat there, shoulders sagging, eyes hollow, staring at the mess he had created with shaking hands and restless nights. For the first time, he seemed to see it clearly. All of it. The lies, the fear, the quiet damage left in every room of this house. And for once, no one rushed to rescue him from the weight of it. The morning light finally crept through the curtains, catching his face, revealing a man who understood, too late, how far he had fallen. Lena stood, wiping her eyes. His mother sank into a chair, and I realized the truth had finally surfaced, but the consequences had only just begun. The morning Lena asked him to leave, the house didn't feel angry. It felt tired, like it had finally exhaled after holding its breath for too long. I watched from the end of the hallway as Mark stood near the front door, carrying a small duffel bag that looked too light for the weight hanging over him. His hands shook when he gripped the strap, but he kept his eyes on the floor as if he couldn't bear to look at any of us. Outside, the sky was pale, washed-out blue, the kind that comes after days of rain. Quiet, hopeful, fragile. The door closed behind him with a soft, exhausted click, the kind that sounds like a life shifting. The house stayed still for a long while, as though no one knew what to say or what to touch. I lingered near the kitchen doorway, feeling the weight of every step we took to get here. Every whisper through thin walls, every sleepless night, every moment of pretending things were fine when they weren't. Lena stood by the window, arms crossed gently over her chest, eyes tracking the space where Mark's car used to sit. Her shoulders rose and fell in small, uneven breaths, guilt and relief fighting quietly beneath her skin. His mother stood near the staircase with her suitcase already zipped, her fingers curled tightly around the handle. She looked smaller than she had days ago, softer, deflated. When she walked toward me, she didn't meet my eyes right away. Her steps were careful, deliberate, like she was afraid even the floor might judge her. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely carrying across the room. "For everything. For not seeing. For seeing too late." Her apology brushed against me like a trembling hand. I didn't blame her, not the way she feared. She had been trapped in her own kind of helplessness. She gave Lena a long, aching look before stepping out the front door. This time, the house didn't hold its breath. It simply let her go. Hours passed quietly after that, the kind of quiet that felt clean, unfamiliar, almost shy. I had retreated into my little storage room, collecting the few things I'd tucked into corners. The folded sweater, the chipped mug, the small photograph of Lena when she was 7. The air in the room still smelled faintly of detergent and cardboard, as though it had never intended to house a person for more than a moment. I was smoothing a wrinkle from my blanket when I heard soft footsteps behind me. "Mom?" Lena's voice. I turned to see her standing in the doorway, fingers tracing the chipped paint on the frame. She looked unsure, the way she used to when she'd break a glass as a child and try to hide the pieces behind her back. She stepped inside, eyes traveling around the cramped space. The crates, the low ceiling, the single bulb humming softly above. "You shouldn't have been here," she whispered. I opened my mouth to say I was fine, that it didn't matter, that a mother makes do. But she shook her head gently. "No," she said again. "You shouldn't have been here." She reached for my hand, letting her fingers wrap around mine with the kind of grip that has taken days to gather the courage to form. "Come with me." She led me down the hallway slowly, like every step was a small piece of undoing the hurt, undoing the silence, undoing the choices we had all let sit too long without air. When we reached the door of my old bedroom, she paused. Her hand hovered over the doorknob for a second, as though opening it would reveal more than a room, maybe a promise, maybe an apology. Then she turned the handle. The door opened with a soft creak, and there it was. The space that used to be mine, emptied now of Mark's mother's belongings, sunlight drifting through the window in gentle lines. It felt different, lighter, as if the room itself had shed something heavy. Lena stepped aside and looked at me in that quiet, vulnerable way she used to when she needed comfort as a little girl. "I want you back where you belong," she said. The sentence hit somewhere deep, somewhere tender. My throat tightened. Tears rose before I could stop them. Not dramatic, not sobbing, just warm and steady, slipping down with the weight of all the days I had swallowed silence to keep peace. I took a step into the room. The air felt softer, safer, like the house was breathing again, finally exhaling. Behind me, Lena's breath shook as she whispered, "I'm sorry it took this long." I squeezed her hand, and for the first time in weeks, something inside me loosened. Later, after she left me to settle in, I stood by the window and watched the light stretch across the floor. It felt like a blessing, or a quiet welcome home. The house was still, but not the heavy stillness of fear. This was the peaceful kind, the kind that gathers slowly, stitching itself back into walls and corners. I ran my fingertips over the windowsill, remembering how it used to feel under morning sun. Familiar, solid. But as I placed the photograph of Lena back on the nightstand, a thought stirred. Soft, unsettling. What happens when the person who broke everything wants to make things right again? The house breathed around me, and I knew this chapter wasn't the end, just the pause before whatever comes next.